Commander Aaron Voss had always hated treaties, not because he didn't believe in order, but because in his experience the empires that signed peace documents were usually the ones sharpening blades behind closed doors. Still, Earth had joined the Medevac Accords, even if it did so with surgical language and strategic hesitation. The treaty had been born in the aftermath of the Targessian burn, when a refugee flotilla was vaporized because its engines looked too much like missile pods. The galaxy decided that some lines needed to be drawn, even in war. So they made one. Medical vessels were off limits. No fire, no pursuit, no deception. They would carry wounded from all species and be marked with universally recognized beacon codes. Violation of the signal was to be met with immediate diplomatic sanction. But Earth had never trusted declarations written in ink. When the planet signed, its Fleet Logistics Division ensured every medevac vessel had more than just compliance. They carried light reactive hull shielding and reinforced trauma bays, nothing that could return fire, but enough to delay a first strike. More importantly, deployment was never absolute. Each ship was allowed to operate only in confirmed green zones and never without AI-led validation of the call's origin. It wasn't mercy. It was calculated humanity, monitored from orbit. Aaron Voss had overseen the deployment schedule personally. Each rotation reviewed thrice. Each beacon key double authenticated. The Dominion, for all its bluster, had honored the code so far. Their hunters might snarl across the borderlines, but they didn't touch the beacons. Not yet. And then came Operation Scald. The distress call sounded clean. A mining outpost on the fringes of Sector 5 and 2A. Severe thermal injuries. Structural collapse. Dominion ID tagged, verified with Council code prefixes. Earth dispatched the first 2 devacs. Then 3 more. Then the rest of the scheduled rotation. All 19 Earth-marked ships launched within 31 minutes. Every pilot inside had sworn the triage oath. Every ship ran quiet, shields down, beacons pulsing. Aaron was in the control bay when the static started. Not alarms, just silence. That humming, wrong kind of silence. One by one, telemetry blinked out. A flicker, then gone. No visuals, no distress rebroadcasts. Just 19 surgical dots, vanishing like light drowned in a vacuum. He stood there for 6 minutes without speaking, watching the kill pattern triangulate. It wasn't random. They'd been herded, funneled into a box that didn't exist yesterday. 3 hours later, the first debris cluster drifted into proximity range. It took another 9 to extract and analyze it, each fragment dusted, sorted, scanned. What returned wasn't evidence of malfunction. It was theater. The beacon cores had been deliberately shattered and arranged in constellation formation. At the center, etched into scorched steel, was a Dominion phrase translated from Hythrex. Mercy sustains enemies, erase it. They hadn't just attacked. They'd crafted a message. Aaron didn't call a meeting. He didn't send a report. He didn't need to, because Earth had prepared for this moment years ago. There were protocols hidden beneath the compliance signatures, layered like nerve sheaths. One of them was Directive Echelon. It required no council approval, no diplomatic liaison, just a simple sequence confirmation from a logistics commander. He walked to the data cradle, placed his hand on the glass, and spoke one line. Echelon Alpha, confirm. The system blinked. A low tone followed. Directive Echelon was live. Outside, Earth's medevac fleet ceased all transmissions. The galaxy had believed Earth soft because its healers came first, because its doctors answered calls that others ignored, but that was never compassion alone. It was design. Earth had trained for war through peace, hardened its protocols beneath surgical steel, and studied every weakness while tending battlefield wounds. The Dominion had misunderstood the silence of a medevac ship as fear. They had mistaken clean floors and calm voices for submission. Aaron watched the last beacon core rotate on the analysis holotable. Cracked down the center, still faintly pulsing, a heartbeat without a body. He didn't blink, he didn't look away. He merely tapped a single sequence into his command slate and forwarded it to refit command. Somewhere above him, 27 Earth ambulances began surgical conversion. The war hadn't changed, it had clarified. And this time, Earth wouldn't arrive empty-handed. Dr. Ivan Marek used to measure his days by blood pressure spikes and cardiac rhythms. A quiet man with calloused fingers and surgical calm, he'd seen more open chests than most field commanders had seen war. His oath was older than any doctrine, passed down from battlefield to battlefield, treat first, question later. But after the 19 vanished medevacs, Earth had rewritten that equation, and rewritten Ivan Marek right along with it. The order came through a courier chip embedded in a package labeled Sterilization Inventory. Standard procedure, nothing abnormal on the manifest. But inside were two things, a reclassification badge and a silver-rimmed neural band. The badge bore his name with a new designation, Combat Medical Specialist, Tier 4. The band was already coded to his cortical ID, no ceremony, no speech. The next day, his clinic was sealed, and his old trauma team dispersed like dust. Every civilian was off the roster within 72 hours. The corridors of Earth's center, our trauma grid echoed with unfamiliar boots. The men who replaced them weren't strangers to blood, but they didn't wear white. They trained with weighted gloves and spoke in measured tones. Soldiers, all of them, but every one of them had a medical credential, not interns, not assistants. These were field surgeons who could clamp an artery with one hand and neutralize a combatant with the other. They trained in rooms where the lights never flickered, under instructors who didn't ask if you'd ever seen death. They asked how fast you could triage around it. Even Marek didn't resist. He didn't protest. He studied. The new doctrine was simple. Directive Echelon allowed for refitting any non-military vessel to preserve operational survivability in wartime conditions. The phrase was deliberately vague. Earth's lawyers had carved it out during the initial council sessions, tucked between environmental compliance clauses and material-grade safety regs. Now, it had teeth. Every medevac ship still bore the same outward hull, still pinged the same beacon frequency, until it didn't. Underneath, armor plating had been swapped for kinetic flex mesh, defense turrets disguised as structural anchors, plasma gimbals labeled as magnetically stabilized beam couplers. To the naked eye, the ships looked exactly the same. To Dominion scanners, they were still ambulances. But inside? Ivan's first refit assignment was MS-2246, a long-haul trauma cruiser previously used for evacuations near volcanic colonies. Now, it was outfitted with what the engineers called survival modules. Marek walked through the main surgical bay and watched a tech swap out a bone drill for a reconfigurable gimbal arm that could deploy a directional plasma burst within a 1-meter arc. "Stabilization arm," the man said flatly, "in case the hull integrity fails mid-surgery." No one said it out loud, but they all knew. These weren't upgrades, they were teeth. The training was quiet. Underground hangars, ship decks lit in blue-filtered silence. Ivan practiced excising Dominion physiology, specifically limb severance protocols for the Threx species. Their bodies didn't bleed in pulses, they vented. That meant pressure trauma, thermal clamps, and post-extraction nanosealants. But now, the surgical curriculum added a twist: implantable tags. Small spinal tracers inserted into unconscious bodies during surgery, coded with passive data siphons. Each operation was both recovery and reconnaissance. Ivan did the procedure 11 times in simulation before he was cleared for field insertion. He didn't ask who the patients were. The bodies were warm, but not alive. Meanwhile, Earth's newly reclassified medevacs began fanning out across disputed zones, not flagged as combatants, not announcing entry, silent, beacon dark. They answered no calls and issued no warnings. To Dominion scouts, it was confusing. Were the humans ignoring protocol? Had they abandoned the Accords entirely? One scout flagged an Earthship near the lawn expanse and approached for signal verification. The ship didn't answer. It rotated slightly, deliberate, slow, and then vanished from view behind a crater wall. That same night, The Dominion garrison nearby went completely dark. There were no alarms, no explosions, just a long, eerie silence. A day later, Council Systems received an automatic telemetry packet from an orbital relay. Inside the final image, an Earth medevac ship touching down on a scorched plateau. No smoke, no visible fire, and no beacon pulse. The ship's hull shimmered, heat distorted, as its ramp lowered, and two figures emerged, both in surgical armor. One carried a case, the other carried nothing. Seconds later, the feed went dark. Not scrambled, not jammed, simply cut. Inside Earth's command bunker, Marek watched the clip without expression. He recognized the pattern. That wasn't a battle. That was a surgical deployment. He reached for his own case. His ship was next, and this time his tools weren't meant only for healing. Field Commander Drevik Haln never raised his voice, not in training, not in combat, not even when half his lung collapsed during an atmospheric drop in the Ogril campaign. He didn't need to. His authority came from the way he moved, precise, unhurried, and absent of doubt. He was a surgeon by training, a soldier by necessity, and something far colder by design. When Directive Echelon activated, Drevik didn't adjust. He transitioned. Earth had trained him for this outcome long before anyone called it war. The mission was simple on paper. MS-4177, reclassified medevac unit, was to respond to a verified distress signal near Hestron orbit, a call issued by the Threx Dominion themselves. Council logs confirmed that it originated from a damaged command cruiser. No weapons had been discharged in the sector for 6 days. The beacon codes aligned, everything checked out. Earth answered. The MS-4177's hull gleamed white under the orbital light, flawless, beacon tagged, its log trail transparent down to time-stamped loadouts. Dominion observers were allowed to scan it twice. No anomalies. The cruiser permitted docking. What they didn't know, what no scanner could detect, was that every cryopod inside MS-4177 held not supplies or medics, but bodies. Dominion bodies. They were the missing. Saboteurs captured during failed infiltration runs, raiders left bleeding on moons they thought were undefended. Each one extracted alive, preserved, and brought back to Earth, not for imprisonment, but for something else entirely, information surgery. Drevik had overseen every extraction personally, not with scalpels or drills, but with invasive nanologs engineered to crawl through spinal data pathways and collect comma and sequences, access protocols, and fleet node hierarchies. There was no interrogation, no questions. The bodies spoke without permission, neurally mapped and dissected with clinical finality, and now, Earth returned them. As the Threx security team stepped aboard the medevac to confirm cargo status, they found row after row of cryopods, each one marked patient status, interrogated. The pods were sealed, transparent, and cold. The Dominion officer in charge began shouting orders, but the ship had already begun its failsafe. MS-4177 detonated less than a minute later, but there was no fireball, only a bloom of blue energy and a pulse that echoed across every listening relay in orbit. The payload wasn't meant to destroy, it was designed to broadcast. Within seconds, 11 Dominion fleet access codes were transmitted across encrypted Council channels, each embedded within surgical telemetry laced into the explosion's substructure. The codes had been hidden in the soft tissue of the returned bodies, uploaded by the nanologs, woven into redundant biostorage nodes. When the ship detonated, it didn't kill. It informed. Drevik watched the transmission complete from a silent command bay 4 systems away. He didn't blink. His gloved hands rested calmly on the steel edge of the console. The data confirmed what they needed: the Dominion's backup relay routes, internal ship verification signatures, and the location of a fleet staging point deep inside disputed space. He didn't need approval for what came next. It had already been queued. 9 more missions followed. 9 more medevacs, all beacon silent, each one landing in high casualty zones to retrieve wounded. Earth didn't always ask who needed help. Sometimes it delivered aid. Sometimes it retrieved dying bodies and returned them marked, tagged with encoded intel, rigged for post-mortem upload, even laced with microsensors designed to confuse Dominion AI. They were never armed, not visibly, not in ways the Council could call a violation. The ships healed, the ships extracted. And then, once they left, the Domi. Nyon found they had been opened. In one mission, Drevik and his team stabilized a half-dozen wounded Dominion soldiers, cleaned their burns, and restored organ function. Then, before departure, they implanted each one with a retinal loop trigger keyed to override local targeting systems the moment the soldier returned to base. None of them knew. None of them needed to. By the time the Dominion realized what had happened, 3 ships had already been disabled by corrupted internal scans. From then on, the sight of an Earth medevac ship did not bring hope. It brought silence. The kind of silence that made seasoned captains hesitate, made ground troops look to the sky with clenched jaws and lowered rifles, because the humans weren't hunting anymore. They were studying. They weren't assassins. They were surgical deterrents. And their scalpel was truth. Colonel Varen Rask stood at the edge of Earth's Central Ethics Assembly Hall, watching his own doctrine dismantle. Not with argument, not with fire, but with quiet edits buried in legal amendments no one dared challenge. He had once helped draft the Geneva X Humanitarian Code, a galaxy-spanning framework meant to preserve the line between soldier and healer. That line no longer existed. He didn't flinch when the first clause was removed. The Council had tried to resist. The Dominion accused Earth of violating the sanctity of non-combatant doctrine. But Rask had sent back only a link. A list of 19 names, medics, surgeons, triage crewmen, all incinerated under beacon codes the Dominion had recognized before they targeted them. No pretext, no admission, just 19 names in a single-column file. There was no reply. The clause was added without a vote. Earth called it the Triage Paladin Provision. It redefined medical ships operating in Earth jurisdiction as dual-agency actors, permitted to defend with proportional force and to retaliate preemptively if interference with aid constitutes existential risk to mission integrity. In Council terms, it meant this: touch a medic and you're now a combatant. In Earth terms, it meant something simpler. Healers now carry weapons, and they remember. The world didn't shift overnight. It recoiled. Fleet commanders across Allied systems began requesting Earth-standard medevac refits. Within a month, over 30 trauma vessels had been upgraded with directional kinetic rigs and reinforced hull plating. Training modules were shared, then quietly adopted. Rask never spoke at the hearings. He never debated. Instead, he sent one image to every representative. A training bay split down the middle. On the left, a surgical table gleaming under precision light. On the right, a firing lane filled with combat medics reloading in silence. The meaning settled in the room like dust. Rask didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply added the image to the clause's footnotes and archived the rest. Earth's medical schools were the first to change. Combat simulation modules replaced passive ethics courses. Every third-year student now practiced arterial repair while under fire. Surgical drills were timed to pulse detonations. One test required a cadet to remove an alien lung fragment from a host while surrounded by VR hostiles simulating Dominion patrols. Failure meant automatic expulsion. Applicants doubled within 6 weeks. The Dominion began pulling its ships away from Earth border sectors. They didn't announce retreat. They didn't protest. They simply stopped broadcasting signals that could be interpreted as humanitarian distress, not out of principle, but because they didn't know what would arrive. Was it a medevac? Or was it a surgical vessel rigged with orbital cannons and trauma personnel who'd studied Dominion anatomy not to heal, but to extract? Uncertainty froze them. Not war, doubt. That doubt spread faster than violence ever had. On the 5th week, a Threx patrol recorded a medevac hovering silently over a downed fleet near the Cathol Rift. The ship made no contact. It hovered, scanned, then vanished into the rift's shadow without dropping a single crewman. The Threx didn't fire. They didn't even approach. They simply logged the sighting and filed for diplomatic repositioning. Back on Earth, Varen Rask finalized the clause addendum and transmitted it without a press release. No announcement, just a time-stamped update to the official Council Doctrine Archive. It consisted of 8 words. Healers who are hunted must carry teeth. That was it. No war cry, no vengeance, only correction, delivered quietly. And the galaxy listened, because in the end it wasn't the firepower that unnerved them. It was the silence that followed it. The distress signal from the Natherun's crown came without preamble, raw, jagged, and real. For once there were no cloaked frequencies, no falsified coordinates. The Dominion flagship had been ambushed near the Ardent Chasm sector by one of its own breakaway elements. Hull integrity was failing, life support was fluctuating. The message was verified by 3 separate Council relays before it reached Earth's strategic aid channel. No one expected Earth to answer. And yet, a single medevac ship launched within 12 minutes. It bore the seal of the Triage Paladin Doctrine, old Geneva X tags still etched on its flanks, but amended in black alloy with Earth's new clause. Conditional enforcement, class white clearance. The beacon pulsed, the signature checked out. There were no cloaking ELDs, no weapons primed. Just a scorched silver hull descending into orbit like a calm reply to a shouted plea. Inside the ship stood trauma operative Ren Vosik, younger brother to Aaron Voss, the last remaining Voss in Earth's active trauma deployment roster, a ghost in surgical armor. He didn't speak during descent. He simply reviewed the Crown's crew manifest and repeated the 3 protocols he had committed to muscle memory. Stabilize, extract, silence. The Crown allowed docking without hesitation. Docking clamps engaged, life support synced, airlocks hissed. All protocol was followed to the letter. Earth's medevac opened its doors. No alarms sounded, no Dominion weapon systems locked on. Ren stepped inside without resistance, followed by 2 anonymous medics whose records were sealed even from Council view. The flagship's corridors were bathed in flickering red and dead quiet. Bodies lined the walls, alive, wounded, dazed. Not one of them moved as the Earth crew passed. They didn't know what to expect. Neither did command. 48 minutes later, the Crown failed to respond to any outgoing transmission. No internal logs, no system echo, just stillness. The Council dispatched a drone for a passive flyby. They didn't dare send a ship. The drone's feed, recorded from half a kilometer away, captured only one thing. The med bay, its doors wide open, smoke drifting lazily through the air like breath after trauma. In the center stood Ren Vosik, alone, motionless, gloved hands stained to the wrists, his visor reflecting the drone's optical shimmer. He looked up, just once. Then the feed went black. There was no visible damage to the Crown's outer hull, no breaches, no scars from battle. Except for the lower stern, where a faint line of surgical cannon residue traced along the plating like an afterthought, as if some silent correction had been made. No fire, no warning, no threat, just correction. Within hours the image spread. No announcement was necessary. The Dominion's own intercedent. Eternal networks leaked it across the stars. At first, factions assumed it was a hoax. Some said the humans had staged it. Others believed the Crown had fallen to its own internal sabotage. But then came the withdrawal. The entire Threx fleet, 8 task groups stationed along the edge of Council-sanctioned lanes, vanished from those corridors. Not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. They stopped broadcasting. They rerouted. They abandoned lanes they had patrolled for decades, replacing open patrol paths with encrypted shadow routes far from medevac operating zones. Not because Earth had threatened them, because Earth hadn't. No speech followed, no military declaration, no triumphant broadcast, only the image. Vosik, standing alone in the aftermath. Every Dominion commander who saw it asked the same question, not aloud, but internally, the way only frightened officers do. What exactly happened on that ship? No one knew. But they all understood one thing. If a human ship arrived, and you were wounded, you might live, or you might be studied, and sometimes there was no difference. Admiral Orhan Talvek didn't attend the council vote. He didn't need to. The outcome had already been decided in the silence that followed Ardent Chasm. When the roll call began, 12 voices representing 12 systems, no objections were raised, not one. The Medivac Accords, once the sacred scripture of wartime mercy, were amended, clause by clause, loophole by loophole, until the final article stood stripped of its core. Non-combatant status was now conditional. It wasn't surrender, it was recognition. A quiet legal admission that Earth had redrawn the moral battlefield without firing a single public shot, and not a single representative could refute the shift, not after what they'd seen, not after what they'd heard in hushed mission briefings where Earth's trauma vessels were mentioned not with honor, but with unease. The council chambers were filled with lawmakers, but none of them could rewrite what had already been carved into orbit. Talvek had once commanded a medevac ship himself. Before the treaties, before the betrayal, he'd lifted wounded from burning moons, operated under sniper fire, and watched young medics stitch soldiers together while trembling from shock themselves. He had believed in the purity of mercy. He'd watched it be betrayed. And now he stood far from the council floor, silent, watching Earth's next generation of ships rise from the planetary dockyards. Each vessel bore the same clean hull, the same beacons, the same protocol identifiers. But burned into the metal just beneath the ship's starboard line, scorched into the plating where no one could miss it, were 5 words in quiet defiance. Defenseless, no. Weaponized compassion. Earth issued no press statement. It did not boast. It did not celebrate. There were no parades, no planets annexed, no surrender demands. The fleets did not advance. The flags did not change. Earth didn't want territory. It had already claimed something far more permanent: narrative supremacy. Dominion systems scrambled to update policy. Internal documents were leaked, showing High Command advising troops to avoid unverified humanitarian contact. Some systems even listed Earth's trauma crews as priority avoidance. That label said more than any broadcast could. Earth hadn't just blurred the lines between healing and war, it had turned the very concept of mercy into something strategic, and in doing so, it had made the Dominion forget how to respond. Orhan Talvek stood in his observation deck as one of Earth's newer trauma vessels, MS-7325, disengaged from its clamps and drifted upward. It moved slow, purposeful. It bore no weapons on its surface, but he knew, better than most, what lay beneath the hull. He watched it until it disappeared into the upper veil of atmosphere. Then he keyed a private transmission, not to anyone in particular, but to an OPA, uncouncil frequency that had long since gone unused. There were no words, no greetings, just static, then silence. He closed the channel. Far beyond Earth's orbit, in a region of space that had once bristled with Dominion warships, now hung only metal corpses, vessels left to drift. No explosion had gutted them, no human strike had arrived. They'd simply powered down, forgotten, discarded like tools that no longer made sense in a world that had changed rules mid-game. Talvek stared at them through magnified optics. Dozens, maybe hundreds. No scars, no battle markers, just abandonment. The war hadn't ended with fire or treaties. It had ended with paralysis. Because when faced with a species that could land a medical ship and rewrite your chain of command in 48 minutes without ever drawing a weapon, there was only one rational response. You stopped making calls. And Earth, ever silent, ever watching, made sure that every unanswered signal from that day forward came with a shadow attached. A reminder. Mercy was never weakness. It was always strategy. If a medical ship landed on your planet, silent, beacon dark, and marked only with the words weaponized compassion, would you let it dock? Let us know your answer in the comments below. And if this story left a scar or a thought you can't shake, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY tales.